Welcome to ATD's Talent Development Leader podcast, featuring monthly conversations with the greatest influencers in the talent development field. We cover the latest trends, hot topics, and future-focused ideas that current and aspiring TD leaders need to know. Learn more by visiting www.td.org and searching for Talent Development Leader podcast. Today, I'm joined by Amii Barnard-Bahn, who coaches successful C-suite leaders and helps companies do the right thing. Amii has been recognized by Thinkers 360 as #1 for career advancement. A former Fortune 5 executive and CHRO, Amii is a consultant and coach to the C-suite and leaders at global companies like the World Bank, Adobe, AbbVie, and The Gap. Amii is a contributor to Harvard Business Review and a member of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches. A lifelong diversity advocate, Amii testified for the successful passage of the first U.S. laws requiring corporate boards to include women. Amii earned her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center and her BA from Tufts. Amii is no stranger to the Talent Development Leader podcast. Over a year ago, she joined us for a couple of episodes, one when she shared career development tips, and another when she talked about change and why it's so challenging for us as humans. I'm excited that she's joining us again to kick off the new year and talk about imposter phenomenon and how to tame your inner critic. Hi, Amii. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, it's so good to see you again. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's a great time of year to talk about this topic, imposter phenomenon. Many of us are embarking on some new goals or setting fresh intentions with the turn of the calendar year. And with any new endeavor, big or small, self-doubt often creeps in. Can I really do what I've set out to do here? Am I truly cut out for this new job, this new role, or this new lifestyle goal? So as we dig into this topic, can you start out by defining for us what is imposter phenomenon? I remember first hearing it called imposter syndrome a few years ago, but I believe we're more accurately describing this experience with the word phenomenon. So I'd love to hear from you about this.
Yes, thank you. Well, imposter phenomenon has been interchangeably discussed as imposter syndrome. We can talk about why I think it's important to try to get back to calling it imposter phenomenon in a minute. But just to answer your direct question, what is it? It's a psychological experience that's characterized by persistent feelings of self-doubt, intellectual fraudulence, and a fear of being exposed as incompetent, despite the fact that you may be very competent and have achieved substantially.
And what is the kind of the swing from syndrome to phenomenon, or maybe we started with phenomenon and swung back to syndrome, or kind of what happened there?
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say the original scientists that coined the terms in 1978, Dr. Pauline Rose Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes, found that some of the most successful women had these issues, the ones that we just went through in terms of feeling of fraud, feeling of being exposed. And so it was a phenomenon because they were actually quite accomplished, right? Why would any woman who had accomplished what they had accomplished feel this way? Now, this was also the 70s. There was certainly not as much gender equality as there is today, at least in the United States, in terms of women attaining professional degrees. These were two women who were psychologists, very renowned in their field, and they started to see this trend. And so that's why they called it phenomenon, as opposed to syndrome. There was a book that was published at some point called The Imposter Syndrome, and it was kind of a catchier title. It's a shorter phrase. I've heard anecdotally that the author regrets that choice because I know that when I hear syndrome, let me know your thoughts, but it sounds like a permanent medical condition, a syndrome. A syndrome is usually a very serious, autoimmune disease or something like that. And I believe that, like me, the word phenomenon is better because it describes the paradox that women who are so accomplished, and men, because men can feel this too, would feel this way. Because from a factual basis, they're accomplished. And so what's going on to trigger these intense psychological feelings of not being enough? I've heard people throw it around pretty loosely over the past few years. It's gotten into the common lexicon, right? Oh, I feel like, I've got imposter syndrome. People will just say that without, I think, appreciating that it's actually potentially a psychological diagnosis that scientists are still working on being able to identify versus normal, healthy feelings of self-doubt and striving for achievements that may slightly be out of your reach now, but if you put the work in, they're not going to be.
That's interesting. And, you touched on kind of the gender piece here and the history and the context of it and kind of how this one was unearthed as something that, or studied as something that occurred for successful women. And I don't know if there's been more research done, on why this is something that women might experience more than men.
It's interesting. There have been some studies. There was a recent meta-analysis of about 108 studies that were done with over 42,000 participants. And they found that women do consistently score higher on measures of imposter syndrome compared to men. The effect size was small to moderate, but it was statistically significant and consistent across these 108 studies. It appears to be persistent over time, despite societal changes in gender attitudes and increased female representation in higher education and prestigious careers. There are some nuances. The magnitude can vary by field and region. For example, the gender differences in how people scored on imposter syndrome were smaller in business compared to academic fields. Really interesting. And then studies in Asia actually report smaller gender differences in imposter phenomenon compared to Europe and North America. So it's kind of interesting. I recently was doing a workshop for people on the promotability index. And out of curiosity, because there were a number of men in the room, we talked about it, and we talked about some of the strategies for overcoming feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt. And you and I'll go through those later. But I said, hey, I just would love to ask the men in the room, how often do you feel inadequate or not up to the job? And they all shared that, yes, they do. So then we had a discussion around, do women just feel more comfortable talking about this and being more vulnerable and sharing? And it's a hypothesis that I still have out there. Yeah. I can't prove it, but I suspect that women feel more comfortable talking about it. So there is a likely perception that we experience it more, even though, yes, it sounds like it is more in general, but men definitely experience it. And that's important to note. They just may keep it to themselves, which actually, if they do have the actual psychological disorder, could be really debilitating. And so I hope that the mental health strides that we've made since COVID in terms of normalizing that, it being okay for people to talk about it, my hope is that that will spread to this as well so that people can get the support they need.
That's fascinating. And I'd love to get into kind of the difference then. You've talked about the psychological, the kind of the diagnosis here. Can you share with listeners, first of all, what does it feel like to experience imposter phenomenon? And then on the spectrum of, feeling a little self-doubt to kind of having a diagnosed syndrome or condition, what does that look like? And where does that line fall?
It is different. I have not personally experienced what I would say qualifies as imposter phenomenon, the diagnosis, but it's highly characterized by an ongoing fear of being found out or unmasked as incompetent. So it is very much someone feeling like they are wearing a costume is probably a really good metaphor to think about, or that they are wearing a mask to the world that has all these degrees and accomplishments or whatever it is in their life that they have accomplished, and that that's not truly a part of who they are. So it is dissociative. They are dissociating with their actual accomplishments. And that leads to a second criteria, which is an inability to internalize your own success, to attribute achievements to just being lucky or external factors. Oh, I was just in the right place at the right time. Or, oh, that's because my parents made that introduction for me. And not thinking, well, okay, I was lucky. My parents were well connected and they did make that introduction. And then I had to earn the job and keep it and succeed and grow a team and achieve all these things in my company, right? So someone who on the unhealthy spectrum would never feel that they genuinely had done anything to earn it. Whereas someone on the spectrum might say, okay, I need to own that, yeah, there was some luck in the initial connection, but after that, I had to prove myself, and I did. That's very different.
I think it's really helpful. You talked about kind of words being thrown around earlier. I hear people use the word narcissist, probably out of context or a little
That's
loosely,
used a lot.
right?
Yes,
Or,
yes.
Even gaslighting, kind of really giving meaning to words so that they illuminate what's actually going on. And I think for people probably throwing around imposter phenomenon who might just be stepping into a new job and feeling a little, getting their sea legs, right? So it's really helpful for you to really define this for us and what that experience is truly like.
Yeah, imposter phenomenon truly needs treatment. It is anxiety, depression, decreased professional confidence, You're discounting your abilities, skills, and accomplishments. I would encourage anyone who truly feels that they're feeling this all the time to get support. There is much better evidence-based psychology and work that can be done around this.
In kind of some prep or research around this, came across the imposter phenomenon assessment, a measurement tool that aims to provide a more comprehensive assessment of the multifaceted nature of imposter phenomenon. Can you describe this tool a little bit more and how folks might access it?
Great question. It's not easily accessible right now. I would say through a physician or psychologist. People have been trying since the 70s, since this was identified as a potential mental health issue. People have been trying to create an assessment for it, just like there are assessments for anxiety and depression, like a scale and a self-measurement tool that you discuss with and do with your psychologist or physician. And the IPA is so far the best one that's been more statistically validated. There were some out there earlier that were not really validated. The challenge with the imposter phenomenon is it's very multidimensional. It could depend on the context and the behaviors, the actual behaviors of the person taking it. So I would say it's out there if people are interested. And I think it's the best one out there right now. And it can be helpful. I think for most people, the behaviors and the feelings are really what's most important. If you're feeling this consistent, persistent feeling, I don't know that a test really matters. I think you should just get the support you need, right? It may be helpful to have it validated, but I think that the treatment, and we'll talk again about strategies for people who are feeling self-doubt. I think the strategies on treating it are most important.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, the kind of the self-doubt end of the spectrum. In a recent article, you explained that the experience of self-doubt or feeling less than is one that even the most successful people in their industries face. And certainly that's what, as you mentioned, Dr. Pauline Rose Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes, when they were kind of first researching imposter phenomenon, came across that, right? These super successful people and then the feelings they have. And so I think that certainly runs the spectrum as well. And you quoted Lady Gaga, who said, "I still sometimes feel like a loser kid in high school. I just have to pick myself up and tell myself that I'm a superstar every morning so that I can get through this day." And I think that's helpful to know that when you enter places, new terrain, certainly discomfort is normal and should be embraced. And you suggest that these feelings are indicative of someone pushing themselves into areas of new learning and growth and getting out of their comfort zone. Can you talk more about this, especially given, our listeners are TD leaders who I think are putting themselves in situations of discomfort all the time and could really use some of this advice?
Yeah, I work with some of the most successful people in their industries, and they always have less than feelings. So I would just start with that. Everybody just needs to know that. Saturday, I did a group debrief with one of the top YouTubers in the world and their team. And they are entrepreneurs. I use the Hogan in my coaching, and there's a profile for entrepreneurs and really, really successful people. And it's having what we call low adjustment and really high ambition. And that combination almost ensures that you will always feel anxious and driven to accomplish. And I find that people who are very, very driven to accomplish also feel that it's never good enough. And so part of my coaching is often around, we need to celebrate the successes. Let's really look at the facts about what's going on here and the standard you're holding yourself to and what you're achieving. As my mentor, Marshall Goldsmith, says, the problem with achievement is you never get there. It's not a destination. And many people who are high achieving, and I'm in this category, I'm at fault here too, is we achieve something great. We've worked on it maybe for months, and then we get it and we're like, oh, that's so great. And then boom, we don't allow any pause or any moment to reflect and bathe in the success. We feel like, oh, that's narcissistic, or to use a phrase, or that's indulgent. I need to get on to the next thing. And I know it's taken me practice to say, Amii, this is amazing. You did this. This was hard. You were concerned about taking it on to begin with, some self-talk, and maybe treating myself to dinner with a girlfriend, or taking my kids to something fun that's a bit of a splurge, or do things with my husband. It's really important to do that, celebrating those. So it's important to recognize that when you're feeling challenged, that means that you're doing something exciting. And that is what growth and life are all about, right? What do we really want to just feel safe all the time and just flat our whole career? I don't think so. And especially people listening to this, T&D professionals, right? You guys are all about living and learning and growing and being curious.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, that's so interesting. How do I learn more about that? That's what's so exciting about, I think, being a human, is that we do have this capacity, endless capacity for curiosity and growth. And so learning and growing is all about getting out of your comfort zone and having a beginner's mindset. Even if you frame it up as, okay, I'm going to accept this speaking engagement. This is a bucket list item. I've always respected and admired people who spoke here, and saying, okay, I'm going to have a beginner's mindset about this. I'm going to talk to some people who have done it. I'm going to be open to support, and I'm going to take this on, and I'm going to be really excited about it. And it may not be perfect, but I'm going to learn so much doing this, is one approach. And the late David Peterson, a dear friend who founded the coaching program at Google, he's one of my favorite quotes, which is, there's no comfort in the learning zone, and there's no learning in the comfort zone. And I love that because, again, it points out, look, don't just stay where you are. Like, this is totally normal. If you're stretching yourself, you need to give yourself credit for that. Just know that it is completely normal to feel uncomfortable. And I think you and I've talked about this at one point too, but the brain center, when we are doing something rote, like driving to work, sometimes if you were driven to work and you get there and you're like, I don't actually remember driving to work. At least when we used to drive to work, some of us don't do that anymore. But when we did, or driving the kids to school, right? Something just really routine. You don't really remember. Our brain center goes dark when we are doing a rote task. It just doesn't need to think. Whereas when we're learning something new, it lights up. Our brain literally lights up and neural pathways are stimulated. So it's literally physically good for you as long as you manage, and we'll talk about this too, how do you manage the stress? Stress can be exciting and motivating, and it can be debilitating. So there's a continuum there that we want to talk about. But those are some things about growth, I would say.
Embracing discomfort, embracing learning and growth in 2025. That's great. Well, we've alluded to this, all throughout our conversation, but some of those kind of practical strategies or insights or tips you have for folks who are experiencing that inner critic, who are in a place of learning and growth, what would you recommend they do?
Okay, so what do you do when this feeling of self-doubt creeps up on you? The first thing I would suggest is identify the source of the anxiety. Close your eyes and think, okay, what am I afraid might happen? And take a minute to write down, what's the worst thing that can happen? And that's helpful, just grounding. And then the second thing is, what is your inner voice saying? What is maybe the negative self-talk or the fear talk that's happening inside? It could be something like, I'm going to fail. It could be really simple. Or I'm not good enough. I can't believe they picked me to lead this project, right? So that's the negative self-talk. And then the third thing I would say to do after you've identified the source of the anxiety, figured out what the worst thing is that can happen and what your inner voice is telling you that might be bringing on these feelings. Third thing is what I call right size your dragon. There's Jungian theory that the dragon represents the unconscious and is there to protect us and also to scare us. And so when I think of right sizing your dragon, I think about fears. I think you want to have a little dragon maybe sitting on your shoulder saying, this is tough, but you can do it, right? This is scary, as opposed to a big dragon saying, I'm going to protect you from this and stand in your way. And I don't want you to do this because it's scary and uncomfortable for you. You want to right size that. And you do that by talking it out, basically. The stress you're feeling comes from a very primal need that serves you well when you are truly in danger. So when facing a challenge that you want or need to face, it can hold you back and become a liability. That dragon can get in your way. So you want to call it out. You want to talk to your fear. You can do this literally or metaphorically, whatever works for you. Tell it, look, basically, I'm going to be okay. I don't need you to ferociously defend me in this. So that's what I think of as right sizing your dragon. There are other things you can do in terms of reframing your anxiety. So for example, people tend to use extreme language when they're really getting anxious, like, I'm a mess, right? It sounds like a permanent state. You want to reframe that to, I feel like a mess today, temporary state, right? You're probably not always a mess. You may feel like a mess today. Okay, that's fine. But really reframe it. Or, I'm worthless. That is a rough feeling, right? No one's worthless. So right now, I'm not feeling so good. I'm feeling a little bit worthless right now because I can't get started on this thing. Reframe it to a temporary feeling from a permanent state. So that's number one. The other thing you can do is ask yourself, when you're telling yourself, I can't do this, I'm not qualified, ask yourself, what is also true? When our brain or dragon is distorting facts and feelings, again, in a self-protective, afraid, anxiety-inducing sense, steer it back to rationality by bringing in additional facts. So, for example, if you're up for a promotion, you may be telling yourself that you're not as qualified as other candidates, or that the hiring partner doesn't like you from some feeling you got on a project that you worked on. Writing exercises can really make you do the work because it genuinely is helpful. So write on 2 columns of paper, what are potentially negative facts that you know to be true about this challenge? And then on the right-hand column, what are additional helpful facts? For example, it could be on the right-hand margin, well, I got high marks on the project the hiring partner asked me to lead last year. Or, okay, this other candidate has an MBA, but I have 5 more relevant years of experience. And so these intentional recalibrate that are fact-based so that you're not letting your emotions run away from you, because it can happen. If you start spiraling, it's really important to refocus and maybe go for a walk first and then sit down and do that. You'll be much more clear. The other thing I love doing, and I do this one a lot myself, is reframing my anxiety as excitement. It's actually the same emotion. Anxiety and excitement are high arousal emotional states. The big difference is they have very different psychological impacts. One is negative, the other's positive. To leverage the power of anxiety, like honestly, start thinking of it as a powerful support to you potentially. You want to flip it to excitement and say, I'm excited out loud, even if you don't believe it at first, as opposed to saying, I am freaked out. That's not helpful. Say, I'm excited. It's also proven if you smile, even when you don't feel like it, and you lift the corners of your mouth up, even just a little bit, the act of contracting these facial muscles triggers the release of feel-good brain chemicals that creates a surprising shift in how you view the challenge that you're about to meet. You should try it. It works. Even when you're sad about something, you're like, I'm tired of being sad about this. Literally just try smiling. It may feel fake. I get it. It's not really how you feel, but it literally is how our bodies are trained to increase endorphins and that kind of thing. So you want to focus on the positive outcomes you're about to meet, not the threats that our monkey brain likes to point out all the time. And then the fourth thing I would say is recognize and treat perfectionist tendencies. This is more of a long-term goal, but if you are a perfectionist, like I'm a recovering perfectionist, so if you have a desire to be special or the best, that's great. That can serve you. You can achieve great things. It can also undermine personal growth over time or lead to being stuck when it's at an extreme. I've done a video about Maria Callas on this that I'm happy to share. That's kind of fun because she was, as some people may know, one of the greatest opera singers of all time. Her perfectionism debilitated her so much that she could no longer sing. She literally lost her voice. And I can't think of any more powerful metaphor than losing your voice, than allowing this to become a psychosis to where you literally can't use your talent for the world. We don't want anyone to ever experience that wherever possible. And I love something also that Amii Ibarra, who's an amazing professor in London, she says, the only way to grow as a leader is to do new things that make us uncomfortable and teach us through direct experience who we want to become. Growth is always going to be some risk, some experimentation of identity, and we've got to be willing to shed behaviors that have worked until now.
Well, I am taking a lot of notes here, Amii. I, like you, and I'm sure my podcast listeners are tired of hearing me say this, but I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I think, the insights here are so helpful for anyone, really. But a couple that stood out to me, I love the idea of writing down. You talked about the kind of the reframing and the columns. Just the act of getting something out of your head and onto paper is so cathartic and such a release. And I think a lot of times when things swim around in our head, like the inner self-critic, it's this exercise of either ignoring or pushing away, but to kind of name it for what it is, embrace it, accept it, and then reframe it. There's so much release in that. And also just the idea of turning anxiety into excitement and even smiling. Again, these simple but really powerful tips. Sometimes when I'm on the treadmill and I'm struggling, I'll smile to trick myself. This is really fun. I'm having a good time. But no, I have experienced that to really work. Yeah.
Yeah. I find that fear never really goes away, nor should it. It's there for a reason. It's a human need. And sometimes we should be afraid that we get in dangerous situations. We don't want it to disappear completely. So trying to eliminate it doesn't work. what I find works is we have to increase our courage. And with discipline and practice, you can learn to channel anxiety and fear as a superpower.
I love that, as a superpower. As we start to kind of wrap up here, Amii, would love to hear, in your recent reading, research, and work, something that surprised you lately. Maybe something on this topic or theme or not, but anything that's caused you to pause and think, or aha. Would love to hear about these insights or epiphanies.
I think the first is that everyone I meet, when you get to know them well enough, behind the LinkedIn, let's say, has these anxieties, and especially the high achievers. It's most extreme at the highest achievement level. So I think that's super helpful to remember and to normalize it again, because people can seem so flawless. It's like figure skaters and the Olympic ice skating champions, right? I think about them. And as a little girl, I was like, I can do that. And then I tried doing it in the living room, right? Did you ever do that? And then you actually get on the air. It's like, it's really hard. So I just think it's important to remember that nothing's easy. I think it was Jamie Dimon who recently said, I loved this on an interview. Someone asked him a similar question. He said, I want to say one thing that really bugs me. He said, I'm so tired of seeing these get rich quick things. I mean, he's one of the most brilliant CEO of JP Morgan Chase, most people know. He said, this is hard work. Anyone who's successful at financial investing, it's hard work. I think of that as well here. It's like, do the work. It's not easy. Anyone's put in their 10,000 hours, to quote Malcolm Gladwell. And we have the power, if we put in the discipline, which for some people could include meditation, if you have trouble with wandering thoughts, that literally trains you to have more control over your thoughts. We're so fortunate to be in a time where we know so much more about the brain and neuroscience. Use that to your advantage, because I've tried to give you some hacks here. I'm sure there are others. So I love that anxiety and excitement are the same emotion. I think that's really stuck with me as I think about this research.
This has been the perfect conversation. Hate to use that word. Perfect conversation to kick off the new year. Just really to inspire, refocus, I think give some really practical strategies and tips for folks who might be feeling a little self-doubt or inner critic, getting on track for the new year with whatever you're facing. So thank you so much for joining me today. How might folks get in touch with you or connect with you to ask any of their own questions?
Connect with me on LinkedIn. My name, thanks for the spelling, it makes me very easii to find. So Amii, if you just look me up, I'm one of the only ones on LinkedIn. I love connecting with T&D professionals. Love it. So please do. I'm a former CHRO and really appreciate all the work that you all do and work with many of you still, which is fantastic. And then my website, barnardbahn.com. I have a whole library of resources. I write and speak and advocate in this space a lot. And it's my own library so that I can remember what I've done and refer my clients to it. So I have literally hundreds of resources out there that are free. And you can join my newsletter if you like. I have 2 newsletters, both one available signing up on my website and then another through LinkedIn called In Confidence. And it's different content each time.
Well, thank you so much and happy 2025.
Thank you for listening to this podcast by the Association for Talent Development. If you found this show insightful or useful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with a colleague.